Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
All right, welcome to the PCB webinar, Aligning ISO IEC 27032, 2023 version, and ISO IEC 27001, or 27701, forgive me, Strengthening Cybersecurity Resilience. My name is Jeffrey Crump. We'll get into introductions here in just a second. Also on the line here, my counterpart, Madhu Maganti, is here as well, and he'll do his own introduction as well. Now, the agenda for today's call, so we're going to do some introductions between myself and Madhu, and then we'll talk about some of the recent events that are driving really kind of the need where we see this this overlap and this drive for organizations who they've got, you know, we've got these privacy information systems that we certainly have to be sensitive with and sensitive about the sensitive information that's in them. But also, you know, the fact that we've got all these systems that are internet facing. Now, if you're interested in a deep dive into individual control bodies and that kind of a thing, yeah, PCB has other webinars that are exclusively focused on some of these standards. What we're going to look at is this overlap between the two. And so there's going to be a bit of a compare and contrast. We're going to see how they align and how they play out from our perspective when we have these internet types of threats facing systems that process, store, transmit this sensitive personal information itself. And so we'll look at that alignment. My name is Jeffrey Crump. I'm a principal consultant at a company called Cybersecurity Training and Consulting based out of sunny Arizona. We have really kind of two brands that are underneath there. One's called the CMMC Training Academy, where we focus on providing training in this new DoD, U.S. Department of Defense Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program that's really kind of designed to uplift the accountability within the defense industrial base and the supply chain. And so training organizations and individuals on how to become assessors in that realm. And then also we have a line of business around cyber crisis response, where we focus on incident response maturity and help organizations really kind of implement a series of either developing cyber crisis management plans, exercises, building and delivering exercises, and then cyber crisis leadership. With me on the line, as mentioned, is we have Madhu. Madhu, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeffrey. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, based on where you're at. My name is Madhu Maganti. I'm a partner at Baker Tilly. I'm located in Houston, Texas. And I've been with Baker Tilly for about a year now. We are a top 10 CPA advisory firm. So we help clients across the board, with setting up their cybersecurity program, including doing risk assessments for them, be it on the NIST framework or the ISO framework, ensuring that we are setting them up proactively from their cybersecurity initiatives. And we also help them with SOC audits that are pretty typical for the US market. We are seeing a lot of folks across the world kind of going on that side where they're looking at more of the SOC audit side of things, just because they can work with their clients and showcase that they're taking their data and their client data seriously. So we help a lot of companies on that front. And then I've been in the regulatory compliance and IT space for over 20 years, and I'm looking forward to this presentation. Again, like Jeffrey said, these are two standards that have been covered specifically and separately in other PCB webinars. So we'd definitely urge you to go out there to get a more deep dive version of these standards. and we look forward to sharing our experience with you in the future slides.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Madhu. So that focus on risk assessments, I think, once we kind of get to the end of this session, it's going to highlight really the critical importance of that function in and of itself, right? And the overlay between these standards, right? And what are we looking for? What kind of risk in particular? Well, we've got the risks like this, right? Which is certainly top of mind and out in the news these days.
Yeah, so the MGM resorts, I mean, obviously, we've always heard the saying, right? The house always wins. And, in this regard, well, unfortunately for them, it was, again, a very low attack sophistication. The bad actors, a certain group went out to the LinkedIn of one of the employees, called the MGM IT desk, got their passwords changed based on them acting as that said employee. So it's extremely easy in terms of how you could gather data that is readily available on the internet and then expose the company based on probably the lack of awareness on the IT help desk side. And you've probably seen, there are a lot of people who call in on the other end of the spectrum, where I could call in a client acting like I'm their help desk and then ask for their password, and you'd be surprised at how many people just give away their passwords. I mean, there have been many shows that I've seen where people are walking on the streets and they ask them these random questions. You'd be surprised at how many people, if you just ask them for their password, give it away. And that obviously is a result of the lack of awareness and other things. But with MGM, they had a significant outage. So I know of people who were in Vegas during that time. They couldn't use escalators. They couldn't use the slot machines, which is probably what they were there for. And then
locked out of their rooms, right?
People locked out of their rooms because digital keys were not working. So you can imagine the chaos that was happening out there, but also think about all the data that they got their hands on. Now, yes, they were able to get their hands on all of this data: name, phone numbers, addresses, social security numbers, and others. But in their press release, I think they mentioned that, yeah, the bad guys have not leaked that information. Now, how do you just go about, depending on them?
Yet, right?
Yet, exactly. Now think of the impact. I think
a way to make an extra buck out of that. They're likely going to do that. We would expect, right?
Exactly, and that kind of data is something that is gold for them. Now they may not release it right now. They'll now I remember that they said they haven't used it for identity theft yet. So, you need to monitor. So the kind of costs that are incurred, obviously we put in that $100 million impact, but it is significantly higher given the brand image hit. Then you've got all the monitoring services that they need to pay for. You've got so many different insurance premiums that are going to go sky high because they're already sky high. So you've got so many different things that you need to be aware of. And we're just trying to paint that picture because this, again, falls into the internet security of things. So, wanted to share this. And I know, Jeffrey, you've got the next one that you want to share with us.
Well, what we don't cover here, but, kind of came up, post MGM or during the MGM incident was Caesars. Caesars then came out and said, hey, us too, right?
And they paid the ransomware.
Yeah, they paid, right? Yeah. So we've got a whole bunch of likely, kind of preaching to the cybersecurity choir out there with all the folks that are attending because there's likely heavily invested in cybersecurity. So,
and it is ironic though, Jeffrey, that you've got this picture out there. I feel like it doesn't resonate with the story, but it is there, the MGM logo, so to speak,
Yeah. That's an angry, you don't get this version of the lion when you're down on the strip, right? This is
Yeah.
the very perturbed MDM version. Well, that's you know, I give credit to Midjourney AI for that lion. I just fed it some factors and it came back with this, you know,
You're
ferociously
hitting upon
this
AI.
digital lion. Yeah, the AI. Yeah, that well, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that, but
Yeah.
not a lot. Yeah, and talking about, just the simplicity, but then the sophistication, right? I mean, we've seen this just over, I mean, really, gosh, I can, think back in delivering some cybersecurity fundamentals courses where, you know, in those, in that content, there were the screenshots from some of the stuff from the dark web and, some of the crimeware as a service types of capabilities. But what was amazing was the level of sophistication of the operations of these crimeware as a service kind of capabilities that that they were the customer support on some of these these organizations was like rated, like in the top, right? It was like, yeah, okay, this is a nefarious stuff, but hey, if you've got to go anywhere for your malware, these are the guys, right? Because their customer support is so great. It's just like mind blowing, right? As to that, and then yeah, that security awareness. I remember we used to embed this video, and it's likely out there on YouTube where uh, they show it was like one of the security engineers, and they're demonstrating to a reporter about how easy it is to trick the employees to turn over sensitive information and convert accounts. And she, had called up the help desk or the customer support, and then just before she did that, she turned on the a baby crying soundtrack in the background. I don't know if you've seen that one,
Yeah, I've
but
seen
it's
that.
absolutely brilliant, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we're going to see that when we dig into the overlap of the controls between 032 and 701. Certainly, you know, human resources and employee security and awareness critical, right? But
And even with
yeah,
this, right, Jeffrey, I mean, I think one thing that we're really good at in the cybersecurity community is to come up with new acronyms. So we come up with a new
right,
one every day, right? Because the
right,
threat landscape is changing so significantly
yeah,
that, there are new things that are coming up. Now, I mean, with the crimeware as a service, I mean, obviously you've got ransomware as a service, and you've got all of these different things where the incentive to get somebody to the dark side is very tiny. So if you get somebody right out of school and you showcase to them that, look, you're living a lifestyle that is far beyond your means, but all you're doing is taking this kit from the dark web, implementing it or pushing it out to whoever you can, and you're taking 60% of the ransom, so to speak, and
yeah,
then 40% goes to the bad guys. I mean,
right,
that incentive is
sure.
large enough for the bad guys to get in.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Who wants to go sit in a, breaking rocks into smaller rocks, or working in the
yeah,
hot sun, and when yeah, you can just a couple of hours a day go in and launch this thing, and yeah,
yeah,
no, it's yeah,
or or
yeah,
or the typical stereotypical stay in your mother's basement, put on your hoodie,
right,
and
right,
just deploy
right,
it.
right, 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 absolutely. Well, the good news is, hey, we do have, we do have the good guys out there, tracking these guys down. This is an example of a seizure of the RAID forums, which had been around for a few years. 2015, I think, was when these guys launched, but yeah, recently and taken down, and there's no shortage of these. My goodness, like I said, when I was delivering that cybersecurity fundamentals training, it was like, there were no shortage of places where you could go buy card numbers and personal information. The market is kind of prime now. I always thought these people were kind of crazy. Oh well, it's on tour or something like that. It's like, yeah, well, that's at some point, right? Even in that tour complex, you got to reach out. Your head has to come above the surface.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Yeah, so definitely out there. So as we, kind of promised at the beginning, really we're going to look at is, when they came to, Madhu and I about, building this presentation, the way my brain works, right? And I don't know if everybody works the same, but you're going to have to endure it because that's kind of the basis of the presentation, is to really kind of look at these independently and then see where is the overlap here, right? We know the importance of 27032, and Madhu's going to jump into real intent, and then 701 and the focus on privacy stuff here, but some overlap in there it was identified, and some of it, as we'll see, is very straightforward. Some of it maybe a little bit looser kind of a thing, but all
Yeah,
right.
so I'll get into the 27032, and obviously is a mouthful, so we'll call it 32, which probably makes more sense for this. So it came about from, moved from information security to cybersecurity. So you're looking more so in the internet security domain, so to speak, everything that is connected, all of the systems that are connected to the internet. And in this day and age, everybody's got multiple different things connected. We're not going to talk about it just from the vantage point of an end user in a company. I think even from a personal standpoint, we need to kind of focus in on a few things to protect our interests, because everything, including our cell phone, is connected to everything, including our bank accounts and, you name it, all these different apps that are talking to each other. So, in some ways, think about everything that we share and apply it on your personal side as well. I feel like that would help companies kind of combat things, because the more you're aware personally, the better you are able to, put that into practice with your companies as well. And they'll appreciate you a whole lot more for that. Knowing what we know about 32 now, we do know that there is no certification for this. So this is basically an add-on to your 27001 and /2, and it isn't compliance driven. So basically, you need to go figure out where your risk lies, and for that we go back to the risk assessment, right? That needs to be a foundational piece for anything that you do while applying both these standards. Because if you've got your 27001/2, if you've got that, then you basically have the technical bandwidth to then push through other controls that probably are an overlay of what is already in place, but you're able to, because you have that foundation, you're able to then channelize those controls and make it a little more streamlined towards internet security. So again, like we said, both of them pretty much expand on 27001. Now 32 is basically only covered on that internet security piece. Now, what comes under that internet security is based on your individual company or their coverage, right? So again, that risk assessment has to be the foundation for everything that you do to understand what you're missing out after you've implemented 27001. So, Jeffrey, do you want to touch upon the 701 piece there?
Yeah, really, just really kind of to the extent that you really you talk about that as it's an extension of 001, right, where we're moving beyond information security into information security and privacy security. It's and what we'll see when we kind of compare and contrast, even from 032, but it'll the comparison will show that there is more stuff, because of the sensitivity of this kind of information. Now we got all kinds of sensitive information out there, right? That in any organization should protect, but this personally identifiable information, yeah, that's certainly important. And so we'll see that it calls out that, hey, for for this given domain or this family or this control, we need more, Right, we need to expand that, because so we can get specific down into the folks that are processing or controlling this privacy information. So we will most certainly see that, and because because we're hitting on this data privacy and the importance of being able to kind of protect that, and we'll see here. We've got some metrics on. And where the bad guys are focusing in particular in Europe. So,
Yeah,
all right.
so with the 032, basically any organization that uses the internet to conduct business, how wide of a statement is that, right? That's pretty much everybody. In this day and age, everyone's using the internet. They're probably taking data in from their clients directly across the internet. They're taking payments across the internet. So you've got a host of different, data points that the bad actor would potentially want to use. And since everything is network related, I mean, you want to make sure that you're protecting your interest, accurately in terms of understanding where your data is, which we're obviously going to hit at in some point in the future slides. But know that everything is around your data. How do we protect the data that is out there, ensuring that you've got the right controls in place? Again, foundationally, you can see that 27,002, you've got 50 odd controls that are broken up different levels. We obviously look at all of our risk assessments from a people, process, and technology standpoint. And the risk typically is in that order, right? I mean, just as we stated in the MGM example, it was the people and the process piece that really messed up things for them. Technology comes in and is an overlay. Again, if you do it right, you're covering your entire basis. But then there are cases where folks might have multiple technologies that the best in class, but they may not be as effective if you don't have the right awareness amongst your people, or if you don't have the processes that people can just circumvent. Case in point, MGM again. And we'll try to intersperse this conversation with some anecdotes as well. Maybe it is time for an anecdote, Jeffrey. What do you think?
Yeah. Everybody loves a good story. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll share one from an internet standpoint, right? And it applies to everybody. So a large company, I won't even name the industry, but okay, I'll have to name it just because it'll give a little more insight. And it probably falls under the privacy side too, Jeffrey. So something for you to latch on to. So a large healthcare entity that we were doing some engagements with, and what happened was they had their reporting system that was available to all of their employees, and we were obviously doing some compliance work, so we were on their guest network. Now once that person showed us the reporting tool, we saw that they've got data for over 50 million people across the US, all of their PHI, protected health information, PII, all of that, right, out there. Now, the moment that person left, I put in that URL because I've got a photographic memory. I guess I don't have it anymore, but then I used it at that time for good, moved it over to my, browser, and I was on the guest network, and I clicked on it. Boom, I had the reporting system. I put an asterisk in the search button. I was sitting on 50 million records out there, which is worth billions of dollars in the dark web. So a simple thing, right? They did not segment their network between the guest and the company network. Now they've gotten to a point where it's extremely hard for people to get in. Now, the basis for this story is that it again is small things that people miss out. They could buy the most expensive of firewalls, but they may not change any of the rules. What does that mean? They're still allowing all of the traffic to come in that they should have prevented. So again, 032 kind of looks into that, gives you more guidance. Again, don't use it as a checkbox sort of an exercise. Use it to actually implement things, and you protect yourself far greater from the risk, because again, we are moving way too rapidly in terms of the threat landscape. We're increasing the amount of data and the capture points that we're collecting the data. So we want to make sure that we're adequately keeping up with the threats and the risk out there.
Yeah, that's shocking. Yes, when you have those situations, for sure. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You got, as I mentioned, we got all kinds of sensitive information that, as an organization, we have to be prepared, to protect. And as you started out at the beginning, talking about this, the risk assessment, and making sure that you have that greater appreciation, and people in the organization having an appreciation for, hey, this, right, the important, if this was your stuff, right, and it very well it is in another company that where you're shopping, yeah, wouldn't you expect to, that those customer service people or those people or those security people are doing their part to protect your data? Yeah, think in those terms, right, yourself. But boy, oh boy, yeah, we've got a lot of work ahead of us on that employee or the awareness kind of side of the house. It's
Absolutely.
always been a problem, will continue to be a problem, but yeah, and it doesn't, here, it extends into the privacy side of the house with 701, right, where we've got, we've got this requirement that organizations need to, focus on, hey, where is this stuff, right? You mentioned like the segmenting and enclaving, right? Where and it's very frustrating. I know it is, probably for everybody that's on the call, where we're in these control bodies. We sometimes we don't have a lot of prescription, right? It says things, we see where you should or you could, or and then sometimes it's like, oh, come on, just jump in with both feet and just use the shall or will, and tell organizations you must have enclaves, right? You must do segmentation, right? As opposed to you can or you may, right? Because left to their own devices, yeah, some organizations will take the easier, lower cost, kind of route. And hey, the reality is there are a lot of, open cybersecurity jobs, and so finding an expert is hard. And when you do, they're not cheap, right? So lots of challenges. We all kind of get it, kind of a thing out there. Now, these kinds of things, right? This ability, right? This vision that we're about to kind of jump in here after we, Madhu's going to focus a little more on 0732, but keep in mind that when we got these bodies of controls and things like that, a lot of this responsibility, right? That uplifts to the chief information security officer kind of function, right? And the need for that function to maintain this situational awareness of not over, obviously you mentioned the legal regulatory kinds of things, right? But then there's, we see this all the time in our contractual agreements with our customers and our suppliers, the responsibility for due care, right? And due diligence. And under there is like pretty much anything that any attorney, right, in a class action lawsuit would want to shove in there. So if you're on that pathway to becoming a chief information security officer, and want to, kind of also look beyond even this stuff into NIST 2, PECB does have a chief information security officer course, as well as a NIST 2 course. We're just over in Paris, and they were hosting both of those sessions, and everything that I heard about that kind of stuff was, just really kind of fantastic. I went through the NIST 2 class and absolutely loved it. And I would encourage all you, if you're, and I'm in the States, right? And so, my vision is that, using back in the days when, I was younger, we used to go to Disney World all the time. One of my favorite rides was It's a Small World After, right? So, that has been my life, right? Grew up as a military brat, traveling all over the world. So great appreciation. So despite the fact that I'm here in the States, my mind is already thinking about the potential implications of things like NIST 2. And so, yeah, if you're a CISO, then certainly would encourage you to reach out to PECB and take a look at those courses themselves. All right, I'm sorry for rambling on.
No, so
27032.
yeah, so 032, I won't go too deep into this because again, I think we probably want to move on to the future slides there, but know that it is primarily to cover internet security. One thing that, Jeffrey, you mentioned was, around compliance and security, right? I mean, when you say the shall versus other things, right? The other words that are more effective and need to be enforced. Compliance does not equal security. I mean, we keep talking about that a whole lot. We talk about, connectivity with, let's say, cloud services. They give you the bare minimum settings, but you need to go above and beyond that. Or if you've got your connectivity with your IT managed service providers, know that they'll do the bare minimum, but then you need to, as management or as a practitioner, ensure that you are providing them with the standards or the controls that they need to comply with to enhance your security posture. You do not want to stay at that bare minimum because that is where the bad actors are able to kind of go past. You want to have the right detective and preventive controls that'll allow you to get ahead of the curve and get back on your feet should you be breached sooner rather than later with minimal spend. And that needs to be the intent of any one of these standards. When you're putting in controls, you want to make sure that you're being made aware of certain things before the bad guys, release all the data out, to whoever they need to, right? So make sure that you're doing these things with a proactive approach in mind. Make sure that you've got the right buy-in from your management because the tone at the top sets everything up either for success or for failure. So if you educate as a CISO, you need to educate your management. You need to make sure that they understand a few of these things. There is guidance, right? Well, we saw 27005, which is used for risk assessments. You can use those guidance. Again, there isn't a hard and fast rule with any of this. You need to apply it based on what you think is necessary. And sometimes most of our clients come to us only because we've worked with multiple other companies, multiple other industries. So allowing for that knowledge sharing and being part of different groups that have actually implemented this and learning from how successful that was or how not successful that was so you can learn from it, it's extremely important.
Yeah, no, yeah, and if you are one of those CISOs and you need, hey, I need some metrics, right, to convince the folks above, right, that are, I need some more money. Well, okay, so this is something I grabbed out of the recent ANISA threat landscape report, just came out very recently, and hey, your data, yeah, sitting in the top three, right? So, um, you know, if anybody had any doubt in their mind, well, yeah, that's a, there's only a 1% difference between the DD. It's just some of this stuff, certainly more disruptive, and there's a relationship, the ransomware and locking it down, and the social engineering simply being, the entryway into getting our data. And so, there is certainly an obvious overlap here. But yeah, data, right? Data is gold in these days here. Yeah, for sure. Now, so, I mentioned to you, one of the, the way my brain works, and, it's going and looking. And so when the 032, this opportunity came up to, compare and contrast, for me, it's looking at trying to find those, those lowest common denominators. Where is this overlap? And so began really kind of jumping into the 032 stuff and just kind of looking into, what are the various controls, and then how do they extend, or where do they maybe need to extend when it comes to the privacy side of the house. Now, from an 032 perspective, Madhu, are you seeing requirements or extensions around just, hey, for the internet security aspects there, or in the security awareness you talked about already?
Yeah, so if you look at it, right, I mean, everything granted, right up front, you've got policies for internet security. So you want to extend what you already have to get that coverage across the board. Access control is extremely important these days. We've already identified that with, poor MGM, we're using them, and I guess they'll be used for a few more months before the next one comes to bearing. But access control, significantly important. If you look at these, right, security incident management, asset management, obviously we spoke about education, awareness, and training. Each one of these have got standards already associated with them, controls already associated with them. You're basically enhancing the population across which you want to implement them. So understanding where your data is, where the interactions are, making sure that you are gaining coverage across the organization, not limiting it to only a few areas that earlier were part of that threat landscape or that risk areas. The internet side of things have picked on so much that you need to kind of understand, hey, what about my network security? What about my endpoint protection? Do I have the right controls out there? Do I even have the right tools in that regard? Because some of these cannot be done without tools. So we're not bashing any tools, saying that the risk is with people, process, then technology. We know that if you enable the process side with the right people and use the right technology, just know that you don't need to get technology for every small thing, that you're getting so many technology vendors out there, when you could probably get something where you've got one technology vendor that covers multiple different facets, because then you're eliminating the entry point through that vendor into your network as well. So limiting that as well. And then third-party risk management, of course, plays a big role on your internet security piece as well. So understanding all of that, knowing that as you get in deeper into each one of these areas, you would want to kind of rely on that risk assessment again. It bears repeating only because that is how you would understand where your risk is. And make sure from your risk assessment standpoint that you're talking to personnel across the board. Don't just limit it to a few people who aren't in the know of the entire organization. A good way that we do it is to get a cross section of personnel across each department, those that fold their sleeves and get in and dirty in terms of dealing with different processes. Learn from them so you understand where those threat vectors could be and where their dependence on the internet or their ingress egress points are as well. So it's something that I definitely recommend that you look over and implement accordingly.
Yeah, and in this kind, there are all the little subsections under the control side from 002 there. But the overlap is obvious, right? And some of these things. So, classification of information. Well, hey, obviously for this conversation, that's privacy information, right? And if you don't know where that information is, right? If you haven't done a data flow diagram, then it's going to be really challenging for you to identify those high value assets that are involved in this process, storing, transmitting of this PII or this sensitive information that you've got in your organization. And if you can't do that, then the stuff above, whether it's incident reporting or that becomes very, very challenging. And then that parlays down into the supplier management, right? So how am I getting this information? Where's this information coming from me? Who am I sharing it with? Who's sharing it with me? And then what are my responsibilities along the way? And this, we have the privacy protection of the internet. So obviously we can see in 032 that they were already thinking, right? Hey, we got that 701 thing. They were like, oh, well, let's cut that off the past. Let's just go ahead and put a requirement in here. Let's go ahead and speak directly to this privacy stuff. And yeah, data masking is fantastic. I was on a call last week with a company that was demoing, they're employing AI technology as a means of reducing the assessment scope for companies by using data masking technology. They're just like saying, hey, in my supply chain, I have to flow down this requirement for you to, for you to protect this different kind of information. Well, to take the burden off the suppliers, they're employing this data masking kind of capability. So no longer is it sensitive information because I've masked it through that life cycle kind of a thing. And so, yeah, really kind of interesting to see really what's kind of happening across the landscape from a technical perspective. And to your point, sometimes technology, yeah, absolutely is the solve, right? Because some of
Yeah.
it is just too big, right? But if you're a small company, we see this in some of the other assessments of smaller companies. At when we assess, in some of these frameworks, we get down to the objective level. So it's the decomposition of these things here, these controls that we see. And it's at that kind of a level, where I kind of say, well, you think of these controls as like the 6-foot hurdle, right? But when you break them down, you'll see that there are 6 1-foot hurdles, right?
Yeah.
And you got to get over those hurdles, right? You got to get over those 1-foot hurdles, but you don't have to clear the hurdle by 3 feet, right? There's not everything doesn't require world-class capability. What you need is effective and complete controls, right? And sometimes a spreadsheet will do it. Right? Kind of a thing.
Absolutely. You don't want to overspend on the solution because that solution could be outdated in a month's time. So
Right.
I tell my clients, stay on average. Don't go to industry leading because you'll soon find out that you've spent so much money that you're, kind of wondering, what is my ROI? Whereas if you stay on average, you kind of have the wherewithal to kind of deal with the risk and the threat landscape as it kind of keeps evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. So to that supply chain kind of perspective, so one of the, I had mentioned the DoD and the cybersecurity maturity model certification. That is something that they're challenged with. So when you go out and you look at the CMMC and you look at the DoD and the U.S. federal government, they have these 20 kind of organizational index groupings for different kinds of sensitive information. Within there is certainly a category about personally identifiable information. There's health information. There's all kinds of stuff in there, right? But this is something that the DoD in and of itself is struggling with. And so organizations all across the defense industrial base, they're worried about, we've got this responsibility. We're flowing it down. This information's moving across suppliers, across the network, and that kind of a thing. We're all equally responsible to be able to kind of protect this stuff and the information itself, and where the adversaries are, their ability to kind of move into our environment. Because what we don't want, and that's why we've got a lot of movement on the intel sharing and information sharing programs out there, is because we want to be able to kind of identify these kind of potentially systemic risks ahead of time, right? So we got MGM just down the street, Caesars. Boy, oh boy, yeah. If I was in that industry, my threat con has just gone up, right, significantly. It should have been significant before, but we know that any one of these kinds of risks can certainly parlay their way across an entire supply chain. And so that internet itself is, it's just a big open conduit for the bad guys to get in, huh?
And Jeffrey, real quick, speaking of casinos, so there was a casino that got breached because the bad guys got in through the wireless thermometer that was sitting in their aquarium. So again, the Internet of Things, right?
Yep. Yeah. And as we were talking about the interrelatedness of these things, and change management, configuration management, these are all really kind of ground zero, right? If I don't know what my assets at an intimate level, then it makes it really difficult for me to establish a baseline. And then if I don't have a known good baseline, then this process of being able to manage the change to it, it's like, why bother, right? If we just,
Exactly.
so it's just kind of challenging. And yeah, cryptography cryptography, we love cryptography, right? But it's not the control, it's a control kind of a thing. We have to have all this other kind of stuff in place, and including the monitoring stuff. So yeah, on that list there, they also mentioned the endpoint stuff. You want to chat about that, Madhu?
Yeah, so again, I mean, part of the 2732 piece is the endpoint risk. And then we had situations where there were Chinese Android smartphones that came in with pre-installed systems. So again, what that did is open up more risk to everybody. It also begs the question in terms of the supply chain piece as well. So you need to kind of make sure that everything is accounted for when you're handling not just data that's coming in from different sources, but also products that are being assembled in your different countries, to ensuring that now in this day and age, I mean, we're obviously in an age of war right now, but the cyber war has been looming for decades now, but then it's only getting worse and worse right now. So any which way people can infiltrate, you're seeing nation state attacks, you're seeing the bad guys and so on. So another another easy access point to them if you don't have your controls in place. So ensuring that it's not all doomsday. Of course, we're not trying to project a doomsday sort of an environment, but if you have the right controls, you get past these points and it won't affect you at all. It's just matter of putting in those controls and testing certain things before you implement them, as opposed to just getting product from said nation, putting it, assembling it, and just deploying it without testing them, right? Doing some QA and other things help as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, nobody likes that stuff, right? Because
Nobody does.
It's hard and it's time consuming, right? So I'd rather have go create a dashboard. Right? That's much more fun and interesting, right? Yeah, and this is like in this day and age, this is what we call in the U.S. the blocking and tackling, right? This is the fundamentals, because we're talking about this is a finished product here, right? We're looking at this endpoint thing. I remember years ago did a full life cycle supply chain security risk assessment for a large chip manufacturer. We went back and identified that researchers were able to adjust the polarity of the sand that went into the chip manufacturing process to trigger activity on the device.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like, okay. Yeah, I don't know when that control is going to show up, but that is right. We're like here, we have those threats are coming from lots of other places as well. But boy, oh boy, we got to hit this stuff now, because we got so much other stuff just kind of looming, where we need to get better. That's above and beyond this whole supply chain thing. So let's see, from the 701 stuff, and then we get a little bit tight on time here. It allows a little bit of time for some Q&A. But yeah, 701, you go WinGem there, you can see that there are some requirements in here, or there's a call for this extension, as I mentioned before, the shift of focus from information security to information security and privacy security kind of management. And so as you jump into 701, you'll see that there are little kind of sections in there where it calls out, this need to kind of extend some things about, it's certainly if you're in the PIM space, you got to know who's processing and controlling PII, because that's going to have a material effect as to, what you need to include and what else you need to kind of address as part of that. To what you were talking about before from a planning perspective, that's that risk assessment stuff, right? Where we got to kind of step back and go, hey, I got to know the kind of stuff that I've got here and what really fits into this wheelhouse of PII. And then I gotta know where I've got it. Where is the scope? Where are my controls? How effective are the controls? Yeah, if you're not doing this risk assessment stuff, then yeah, you're kind of going into this thing a little blind, right? Because that needs to really set the context for what should we be doing, and then if you're going to go in and you're going to, because at some point you got to make some decision about the statement of applicability, what controls. Well, how do you know which ones are applicable if you don't know what kind of information or what your obligations are to protect this stuff? So that's definitely a bit of a challenge. Now, certainly policies, as you would expect, that hey, if we've got some great, some kind of information, if our policies aren't speaking directly, to this PII kind of stuff, we would expect to see those kinds of things in there. When it comes to the organization, that they mention, a call out for somebody, having somebody that is a point of contact for management of this PII program within an organization. We talked a bit about the asset management, the importance of really kind of knowing the river of that data, this sensitive information, and then correlating that to the assets and systems that are used to support that kind of a business process. And then foundational, access control. Boy, if we can't figure out who needs to, what kind of, who the people are, what the systems are that connecting into our high value environments, then that's going to be a challenge, right? to be able to do that kind of a thing. Let's see here. On the previous page we were talking, there's that operation security, and when you kind of step back and look at this again, this relationship here. So information security from an incident management and a business continuity. Obviously we need to understand that there's a difference, right? We have incidents, and there are lots of things that are happening in the incidents, and the ability to do disaster recovery and business continuity is an element of that. But collectively, we need to be able to respond. Kind of like what it's kind of a mixed kind of a response from industry on how MGM handled their response to the public kind of a thing. That's what we get sometimes. Sometimes, hey, it's their business. They can kind of run this incident response however they want, kind of a thing. We maybe would have liked to have seen it handled a little bit differently, but that's maybe sometimes just a matter of opinion, and the market will tell over time as to, how well they think that thing was kind of managed there. Just as a direct comparison, I want to kind of call this out so you can see where they're, when if you're in this role, and if you're a CISO or somebody on your team is doing this compare and contrast, so that all of this stuff, you can see where we have some very direct kind of correlations, and then sometimes it's a little looser. But the reality is, I think we would just all agree that all of this kind of stuff here, right, should be part of a mature organizational information security and information privacy management program. We know that the evil outside world and their way into our organizations is through that internet, and so my goodness, we have to protect that. Just like we're going to protect the front doors and the back doors and our power and our critical infrastructure kind of elements and those that are feeding our organization. You want to do all this stuff for sure, but to your point, how do we do it? Right? How do we, what's the we want to do things in a risk-driven, risk priorities type of a fashion, but we have 1,000 things that we need to do. And as you kind of kicked it off, is that risk assessment really kind of gets the party started. So as you're going off and doing these kinds of things, maybe Madhu talking about this idea, this harmonized, holistic kind of a viewpoint, but not losing track of this, where your priorities might be from a confidentiality, integrity, and availability perspective.
So I know, Jeffrey, we've got 5 minutes for questions. Do we want to just kind of pause and check with the organizers if there are any questions?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Madhu and Jeffrey, for delivering this highly informative webinar. So we have a few questions. If you want, we can leave them for the end once you're done with the presentation.
Okay. All right. We just got a couple of slides here, so maybe we'll just kind of wrap this up real quick. So as we were just kind of talking about, if you're in this position where you can, where you're driving a strategic direction. Yeah, from my perspective, right, and this is just Jeff's perspective, is my brain wants to look for these similarities, these overlays. What are my obligations? What are my requirements, right? And what are my risks? And you got to kind of get all that stuff harmonized together so that you can make an informed decision about, hey, we've got these risks, and it's, well, but where does that risk lie? Is it, if I've got this PII and this is a predominant part of my business, then maybe that that needs to be a bit, I need to close a gap. I've got some kind of a vulnerability in that space, as opposed to, well, I do have some risk over here, but it's maybe a smaller part of the organization. There's a prioritization kind of a perspective, and then there's lots of other things that are going on in the organization. You've got this legal regulatory, you might have some kind of requirements for third-party assessments out there, and you don't want to fail your assessments. and sometimes you can get close, but maybe not do everything when it comes to those assessments. So all of that stuff just kind of goes into this decision-making process. But
And another thing, just to quickly add, the privacy office needs to talk to the security office and vice versa.
Yeah.
So speak the same language, make sure you're addressing things. There's no overlap in terms of what's being done, because sometimes what security is doing could potentially help privacy, and they don't need to do that. So talk to each other, understand that who's got ownership over a few things, because there could be some commonalities like we discussed. Once you've figured that out, then it makes it easy, because then you've got ownership, and then you also understand, what the goals are for each areas. Like on the privacy side, what are the goals on the security side? Because you don't want to create a opportunity, as is the security office is known as the office of no, right? I mean, we say no to everything before we say yes, but it probably needs to be yes, but, and then ask more questions, then you can get to an actual yes, right? So working together with those folks is pretty critical. Now, I do have a hard stop in a couple minutes, but I can touch upon these pretty quickly. So we've got ransomware that, again, it is not going anywhere, right? It is still continuing to stay. They are going to steal your data now instead of just encrypting it. So, whether you pay them the ransomware or not, know that you need to have the right controls to kind of protect yourself. Supply chain vulnerabilities, we've touched upon this already. It's pretty significant. Ensure that you've got your third-party risk management program in place. There are tools for that, but you don't really need to use tools per se. If you've got the right processes and the right documentation, you kind of can take that going forward and address that effectively. Now, cloud computing, yes, we spoke about that. Obviously, you feel like you're transferring the risk when you move to cloud. Know that if they've got the bare bones setting out there, these are labs that the bad guys create all the time and break in with ease. You need to add additional layers of security. It's like peeling an onion, right? The more layers that they go past, they're crying and they're like, okay, forget it. We don't want to go anymore. Create those layers so you cause them to move on to the next person, as opposed to staying and trying to get through to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Madhu. All right, hey, we made it. I think we got seconds left to spare here. So we'll turn it over to the PECB folks if we've got time for Q&A. If not, well, I think we've kind of reached our hour. But I think the promise here is that I know you folks probably had some questions for Madhu and I. I think PECB folks will take those, send them to us, and then I think the agreement will just kind of respond to those via email or some other channel.
Thank you once again, Madhu and Jeffrey, for delivering this highly informative webinar. So yeah, we have a few questions that the audience have asked us. I'm going to pass two of them, and the rest you can answer later, and we can share them with the audience. So without further ado, the first question is, what role do you think artificial intelligence is going to play in this new cybersecurity and threat models in the years to come?
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, a lot. So you already heard where AI is being utilized as a means to this product that I was looking at. It was doing real-time, ongoing risk assessments and risk conformity based upon a framework. So it was keep an eye on everything and how it was configured in the organization, and then correlating those configurations and those overall postures to the risks to the organization, and then being able to dynamically update the documentation to reflect that realistic environment. So you've got that element. The flip side, from my perspective, is the risk of what are we putting into that, right? What kind of information, sensitive information? We already know we've got some challenges with educating our employees about, hey, don't do this kind of stuff, right? The last thing we don't want them doing is pumping, some of these publicly available types of AI engines full of this sensitive information. Now, if we can, if an organization can build these confined, closed loop types of AI systems where there's no, external influences, and then you can use those as a quick reference for the organization, that's brilliant. But what it does is introduces an entirely new set of cybersecurity controls around protecting the integrity of the data that's in that back end. Madhu, what do you think from an AI perspective?
So one thing to add, from the model itself that's been created, like the algorithm that's created for AI, if the bad actors get into that and reverse engineer that, then they're going to make that work against you as well. So you need to have, there is an AI risk framework that has come about in the US, which obviously would be adopted across the world. Maybe not in that form, but at least some pieces would. I think it's good to have controls around how you utilize AI, who uses it, what is being fed in there, having appropriate access control there too, because you might have certain high-risk individuals who shouldn't be utilizing that at all, given the kind of data that they've got access to, which they don't need AI for. So there are a lot of moving pieces. Again, we're not there yet. We're still talking about, yes, this high adoption rate, but we also need to talk about, once we get there, what are the security elements that we need to put in place before it's highly adopted. Right now, we're seeing small pieces, which are more so on the personal side with ChatGPT and such. The moment it's adopted widely by organizations, there needs to be a lot more cadence in terms of the controls that are put into it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, that's an excellent point. That AI RMF that was released by NIST not too long ago. Yeah, brilliant. All right, next question.
Okay, another question is, what are the first 3 steps that a medium-sized company must take to create a cybersecurity risk management system?
All right, Madhu, you want to talk about that?
So I think steps. Again, that was, start off with doing, I couldn't say 3, right? I'll hold myself or be neglectful of some other thing that probably is out there. I'd say make sure that you start off with a gap analysis, figure out where you're at from a risk assessment standpoint. If you need assistance, get a third party consultant to kind of come out there, because they've seen it across different industries and probably in your industry. Once you do that, make sure that you've got the right policies and procedures that are all documented, and then allow for creating an audit trail for everything. So not really saying it to fit 3 things in there, but saying that you need to have continuous monitoring of your security engine, so to speak, that there needs to be touch point. Obviously, there are so many different aspects to, we break it down on the US side, right? Identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. We want all of those domains to be covered. But if you start from a gap analysis, try to work your way through, get the right controls, get accountability, create audit trails, I think you're setting yourself up, and then for success, that is. And then from a compliance standpoint, use compliance to your advantage. If your management is not allowing you the budgets to do certain things, compliance is helpful in terms of educating them and letting them know that, look, we need to get these things done. This is what we've identified, and this is what we need to get done. So you show that ROI as well. And I think at the end of the day, when you get that management buy-in, work gets a lot more smoother because people start conforming to the requirements of the security office.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Madhu.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, both Madhu and Jeffrey. A pleasure to have you for this webinar. Now, please be informed that this session is recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
All right, Madhu, take care. We'll chat soon.